Welcome to today's episode of the Deep Dive Credit Podcast, presented by Elite Credit Solutions. We are your trusted partner in affordable credit repair, proudly based in Tampa, Florida, and dedicated to serving clients across the entire United States. Join us as we explore the intricacies of credit management, share expert insights, and empower you with the knowledge you need to achieve your financial goals. Get ready for an enlightening journey into the world of credit. Let's dive in.
All right, so jail time and debt.
Pretty intense combo, right?
Definitely. We're diving deep today into whether owing money can actually put you behind bars.
Mm-hmm.
You've sent over a whole stack of articles about it. Upsolve, CFPB, Experian, and LendingTree. Looks like you've done your research.
Yeah, I've been trying to wrap my head around all these legal details, so I'm hoping we can, sort of untangle things.
Exactly. And honestly, I think a lot of people have probably wondered the same thing at some point, right? Like, can you actually go to jail just for owing money?
It's a question that comes up a lot. And to be honest, it's a lot more complicated than a simple yes or no answer.
Okay, so let's rewind a bit, go back in time. We've all heard about debtors' prisons, right? Like that whole Charles Dickens vibe.
Oh, yeah.
But those are a thing of the past, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, debtors' prisons were officially outlawed in the U.S. back in 1833.
Okay, good. So no more throwing people in a dungeon just because they owe a few bucks. But I get the feeling there's more to this story.
Yeah, there's definitely some nuance here. It's not quite as black and white as it might seem.
Okay, so what's the reality in the U.S. today? Can you go to jail for debt or not?
Legally, you can't be imprisoned just for being in debt. But UT, and this is a big but, there are certain situations where debt can indirectly land you in some serious legal trouble. And yeah, sometimes that trouble can even include jail time.
Okay, this is where things start to get interesting. So what are those situations?
Well, one of the most common ways this happens is through something called contempt of court.
Contempt of court. Okay, lay it on me. What does that even mean?
So imagine a creditor sues you for an unpaid debt and wins. The court might issue certain orders, like they might require you to appear for a debtor's examination, where you have to answer questions about your finances under oath, or maybe follow a specific payment plan.
So far, so good. But where does the whole contempt thing come in?
Well, if you disobey these court orders, like say you don't show up for the debtor's exam, or you skip out on those agreed-upon payments, you could be found in contempt of court. And that, my friend, is where things can get a little dicey.
Dicey how?
Because contempt of court can actually result in jail time.
Oh, wow. So it's not the debt itself that puts you behind bars, but the act of defying the court? That's a pretty big distinction.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more interesting. This ability to jail someone for contempt of court in debt cases, it isn't actually universal across the U.S. 6 states, Alabama, New Mexico, North Dakota, South Dakota, West Virginia, and Wyoming, they don't allow these kinds of contempt of court arrests. The ACLU has been pretty vocal about this, actually.
Hold on, wait. So it's legal in more states to jail someone for this than not?
Yeah, it's kind of a, I don't know, it's a strange situation.
That's pretty surprising. Are there any other, any other situations where owing money could land you in trouble with the law?
Yes, there are a couple other big ones, child support and taxes.
Okay, so let's start with child support.
So if you fail to pay court-ordered child support, you could face jail time. Although I do have to say that courts usually see this as a last resort.
How come?
Well, because, think about it. Putting a parent in jail for not paying child support,
Yeah.
that actually makes it harder for them to earn money and make those payments.
It's kind of a catch-22, right?
It is. It really is.
Okay, so child support's a tricky one. What about taxes? How does that tie into all of this?
All right, so with taxes, it's not about just owing money. It's about breaking very specific laws.
Yeah.
Things like intentionally evading taxes or, filing a totally fraudulent return, that kind of thing.
So it's not the debt itself that's the problem. It's about committing a crime, essentially.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've established that simply being in debt won't get you thrown in jail, but there are definitely some legal minefields to be aware of.
Yes. Right.
And I have a feeling that some, let's just say, less scrupulous debt collectors might use that to their advantage, right? Try to scare people into paying up.
Yeah, that can definitely happen. It's important to remember that debt collectors, they can't legally threaten you with jail time. But, unfortunately, they don't always play by the rules.
I was just going to say, I've heard some pretty wild stories about debt collectors using scare tactics.
It's true. And it can be really intimidating when they start throwing around legal terms or making threats.
So let's talk about that. What should people do if a debt collector starts getting aggressive, say, threatening to have them arrested or calling them at all hours of the night?
First of all, don't panic. Remember, you have rights. There's this thing called the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, the FDCPA, and it lays out very specific guidelines for how debt collectors can and cannot interact with you. So, for example, they can't use abusive language, they can't threaten violence, and they can't lie about how much you owe.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about those late night calls? Is there anything that protects you from that?
You know, I was reading the Lending Tree article, and they had a really interesting point about that. Debt collectors can only call you between 8 a.m. and 9 p.m. in your time zone.
Really?
Yeah. No more of those midnight scare tactics. So if they're calling outside of those hours, that's a big red flag that they might not be playing by the rules.
That is a good thing to know.
It is.
Okay, so let's say a debt collector is breaking the rules. What can you do?
The most important thing is documentation. Write down everything. Keep a record of every interaction, phone calls, letters, emails. Note the date, the time, and a summary of what was said.
Okay, good old-fashioned record keeping. That's good advice in any situation, really.
It is. And if things escalate, you can file a complaint with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB, or the Federal Trade Commission. And you can even send a cease and desist letter if you need to.
So basically, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself.
Right. Knowledge is power. The more you know about your rights, the less intimidating those debt collectors will seem.
Absolutely. Now, let's switch gears a bit and talk about something called debtors' examinations. I have to admit, the name itself sounds a little ominous. What exactly are those?
I know, right? It sounds scary. But it's basically a legal tool that creditors can use after they've obtained a judgment against you. They can ask you questions about your assets and income, and you have to answer under oath.
Okay, so you're in a room under oath, being grilled about your finances. I can see why that would be nerve-wracking. But what's the point? What can they actually do with that information?
Well, they can use it to try to collect on the debt. Like, for example, it could lead to wage garnishment, which means a portion of your paycheck is automatically taken to pay your debt.
Okay, so it's serious business. But, they can't just demand a debtor's examination out of the blue, right?
No. It usually only happens after a creditor has already gone through the legal process of suing you and winning a judgment.
So if you ignore a court order to appear for a debtor's examination, you could find yourself in even more hot water.
Yeah, you could be held in contempt of court, which, as we discussed, can have serious consequences, including jail time. It's always best to respond to these legal notices appropriately.
Got it. So we've covered a lot of ground here today when it comes to the potential legal pitfalls of debt. It seems like while going to jail just for being in debt is rare, there are definitely situations where owing money can indirectly lead to some serious legal issues.
You've summed it up perfectly.
And what about the emotional side of all of this? It can't be easy dealing with debt collectors and court orders and the fear of potential legal consequences. That must take a toll.
Oh, absolutely. It can be incredibly stressful and overwhelming, especially when you feel like you're alone in this. But the important thing to remember is that there is help available. There are people who understand what you're going through and resources to guide you through this process.
That's really important to hear. So let's move on to some of those more empowering ways to deal with debt. We've touched on a few, but I'm curious to explore them in more detail.
Sounds good. Let's do it. We were talking about how creditors have found these loopholes, these ways to exert pressure.
Yeah.
Well, communication can be a powerful tool.
Mm-hmm.
It can flip the script. When you reach out to your creditors proactively, explain your situation honestly and explore potential options.
Right.
You're taking charge of the situation. It's not about waiting for them to come after you. It's about, dictating the terms of engagement.
That's a really good point. It feels like you're not just at the mercy of these creditors.
Right.
You're actually taking control and exploring potential solutions together.
Exactly.
So what kind of options might creditors be willing to consider? Like, what are we talking about here?
You'd be surprised how often creditors are willing to work with you. If you approach them with a genuine desire to find a solution,
Okay.
they might be open to negotiating a temporary payment plan,
Okay.
reducing your interest rate, waiving late fees, or even, agreeing to a debt settlement.
So they're not always the bad guys.
Not always.
They actually might be willing to work with you.
Yeah, remember, it's in their best interest to recover as much of that debt as possible.
Right.
And working with you can sometimes be more effective than pursuing aggressive collection tactics.
So the key takeaway here is don't bury your head in the sand.
No.
Open that line of communication.
Right.
See what's possible.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got communication with your creditors.
Mm-hmm.
What about credit counseling? We've mentioned this a few times.
Yeah.
But how can that help someone who's struggling with debt? Like, what exactly does it involve?
Credit counseling agencies.
Yeah.
Oh, they're like a secret weapon in the battle against debt.
Okay.
They're often nonprofit organizations with these certified credit counselors who can provide a whole range of services.
Okay.
From budgeting guidance and financial education to, debt management plans and even negotiation with your creditors on your behalf.
Oh, wow.
They can really help you create a personalized plan to address your specific financial situation and get back on track.
Now, Experian, they specifically mention the importance of choosing a reputable credit counseling agency.
Yes.
How can our listener, how can they find one they can trust?
Great question. There are definitely some bad actors out there.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So it's important to do your research. The National Foundation for Credit Counseling, or NFCC.
Okay.
That's an excellent resource for finding certified credit counselors.
Oh, good to know.
They have this directory of member agencies that adhere to ethical standards and offer their services at little to no cost.
So avoid those that are charging super high fees.
Yes, absolutely.
Making unrealistic promises.
Big red flags.
Yeah, okay. So you've got communication with your creditors, credit counseling.
Right.
Those seem like great starting points. Let's talk about debt management programs.
Okay.
What exactly are those? How do they work?
Okay, so debt management programs. These are often offered by those credit counseling agencies we were just talking about.
Okay.
And they're a way to consolidate your unsecured debts.
Okay. What's unsecured debt again?
Things like credit card bills, medical bills, personal loans.
Okay, got it.
You combine those into a single monthly payment.
Oh, okay.
The credit counseling agency works with your creditors to negotiate lower interest rates and potentially waive some of those pesky late fees.
Oh, okay.
You then make one monthly payment to the credit counseling agency,
Right.
and they distribute the funds to your creditors according to the agreed upon plan.
So it's like a way to streamline your repayment process and potentially make your debt more manageable. Instead of juggling all these different payments and interest rates, you've got this central point of contact and a clearer path towards becoming debt-free.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so it sounds pretty appealing, but are there any downsides to these programs? What should people be aware of before signing up?
Yeah, it's important to do your due diligence, understand the terms before you commit.
Right.
Even though nonprofit credit counseling agencies typically offer these programs at a relatively low cost, there might be some setup fees or monthly maintenance fees.
Oh, okay.
You want to factor that into your budget.
Makes sense. Anything else?
Yeah, you want to make sure you understand the terms of the program.
Yeah.
How long will it last? Will it affect your credit score? What happens if you miss a payment? These are all important questions to ask.
Right. It's always wise to ask those questions, read the fine print before committing to any financial program.
Yes.
Speaking of which, let's move on to debt consolidation.
Okay.
So we talked about this a little bit before, but can you explain a bit further? How is it different from a debt management program?
Okay, so debt consolidation is another strategy for getting a handle on multiple debts. It involves combining several debts into a single, hopefully lower interest loan.
Okay.
This can simplify your monthly payments and potentially save you money on interest charges over time.
So if you've got a bunch of, say, high-interest credit cards, you could consolidate those balances into a single personal loan with a lower interest rate.
Exactly. It's like, it's like trading in your old clunker for a shiny new car with better gas mileage.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So how do people typically go about consolidating their debts? What are the most common ways?
Okay, there are a couple of common ways.
Yeah.
One option is to take out a debt consolidation loan.
Okay.
Which is, it's a personal loan specifically designed for this purpose.
Gotcha.
Another option is to use a balance transfer credit card.
Okay.
Which allows you to transfer balances from your high-interest cards to a new card with a lower introductory APR.
Okay, so those are the two main options.
Yeah.
Debt consolidation loan or a balance transfer card. Are there any pros and cons to each approach that we should be aware of?
Always trade-offs.
Right.
Right. So debt consolidation loans usually offer fixed interest rates and fixed repayment terms, which can provide some peace of mind.
Sure.
You know exactly what you're paying and how long it will take to pay it off.
Yeah.
However, qualifying for a debt consolidation loan with favorable terms often requires good credit.
Oh, okay.
So if your credit score has taken a hit because of your debt, you might not get approved, or you might end up with a higher interest rate than you were hoping for.
Okay, that makes sense. What about those balance transfer cards? I mean, they sound almost too good to be true, like transfer your debt, get a lower interest rate, problem solved, right?
Well, it's not quite that simple.
Yep.
Balance transfer cards can be a good option for taking advantage of those low introductory interest rates.
Mm-hmm.
But those rates usually expire after a certain period,
Oh, right.
typically somewhere between 12 to 18 months.
Okay.
If you haven't paid off the transferred balance before that introductory period ends,
Right.
you could end up with an even higher interest rate than you started with.
So it's essential to have a solid plan
Yes.
to pay off that balance before those introductory rates go away.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you could actually end up in worse shape.
Yeah. It's like playing a game of financial musical chairs, you know.
Oh, I like that.
You have to find a seat before the music stops. But seriously, before you jump into any debt consolidation method,
Right.
it's crucial to do your research.
Mm-hmm.
Compare interest rates, fees, repayment terms, and make sure it truly lowers your overall interest costs
Yeah.
and simplifies your repayment process.
So it's not a guaranteed fix.
It's not.
Yeah.
No, it's not a magic solution. And it only works if you use it strategically.
And I imagine it's not a substitute for addressing those underlying spending habits that led to the debt in the first place.
Right.
I mean, if you consolidate your debt, but you're still overspending,
Mm-hmm.
you're just going to end up right back where you started.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Mm.
Consolidation can be a useful tool,
Yeah.
but it's not a quick fix. It needs to be part of a larger plan
Okay.
that includes budgeting, tracking your spending,
Mhm.
and making, conscious choices about how you use your money. It's about creating healthy financial habits that will set you up for long-term success.
I love that. It's not just about getting out of this immediate debt. It's about building a solid foundation
Mhm.
for a healthy financial future.
Yes.
Now, I want to circle back to something that keeps coming up.
Okay.
Those shady debt collection tactics. Let's give our listeners some more specific tips for dealing with aggressive debt collectors. What are some things they can do to protect themselves?
The most important thing
Yeah.
is to know your rights. The FDCPA is your best friend in these situations. Remember, it lays out very specific guidelines
Mm-hmm.
for what debt collectors are and are not allowed to do.
Right. And we talked about some of those, like those restrictions on calling times and the whole thing about using abusive language and making false threats.
Right.
Let's go a little bit deeper. What other kinds of behaviors are considered harassment under the FDCPA? Like, what should people be watching out for?
So they're not allowed to contact you at unreasonable hours.
Okay.
They can't call your workplace if they know your employer disapproves.
Right.
They can't discuss your debt with anyone else,
Okay.
including family members,
Right.
neighbors. They can't lie about the amount you owe
Right.
or threaten to take legal action that they're not actually authorized to take.
Okay.
And they certainly can't pretend to be law enforcement officers or attorneys.
So to recap, if a debt collector is calling your family members, showing up at your workplace, or making threats about legal action, those are all big red flags.
Absolutely. And, as we've talked about, it's crucial to document every interaction.
Yeah.
The more evidence you have,
Mm-hmm.
the stronger your case will be if you need to file a complaint or, take legal action.
Right. Okay. So documentation is key. What other, I guess, smart strategies would you recommend for dealing with these pushy debt collectors? Like, how can people really stand their ground?
One tactic that can be helpful is requesting that all communication be in writing.
Okay.
Not only does this create a paper trail,
Right.
but it also slows down the process and gives you more time
Sure.
to consider your options.
That's a good point.
Another strategy is to inform them that you're consulting with an attorney, even if you're not at that stage yet.
Yeah.
Sometimes that alone can make them back off a bit.
Interesting. Now, Upsolve had some interesting insights on this. They recommended filing complaints with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB. What's your take on that?
The CFPB is a fantastic resource for consumers facing debt collection issues.
Okay.
They have the authority to investigate and take action against debt collectors who are breaking the law.
Right.
Filing a complaint with them can not only help resolve your individual situation,
Mm-hmm.
but also contribute to broader efforts to curb abusive debt collection practices.
It's like hitting two birds with one stone.
Exactly.
Protect yourself and protect others.
Yes.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the legal side of things, but I think it's equally important to acknowledge the emotional impact of debt.
Yes,
I
definitely.
mean, dealing with debt, it can be incredibly stressful, overwhelming.
Yeah.
And those feelings can be amplified when you're facing these aggressive collection tactics.
It's true. The psychological toll of debt is often overlooked.
People struggling with debt
Yeah.
can experience a range of emotions: shame, anxiety, fear, even hopelessness.
Yeah.
And these feelings can make it even harder to take positive steps to address the situation.
Exactly. It's like this vicious cycle, right?
Yes.
You feel overwhelmed by debt, so you avoid dealing with it, which only makes the problem worse and increases your stress levels.
It can feel impossible to escape.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to our listener who might be feeling, emotionally drained by this whole debt situation and maybe even afraid to answer the phone because they don't want to deal with another harassing debt collector?
Yeah.
Like, how do you even begin to cope with that?
First and foremost, I would say be kind to yourself.
Okay.
There's no shame in struggling with debt. It happens to people from all walks of life. And it's important to remember that your worth as a person is not tied to your financial situation.
I love that because it's so easy to, internalize those feelings
That is.
of shame and start to believe that you're a failure because you're in debt. Yeah, but it's not true.
Yeah.
It's crucial to challenge those negative thoughts and remind yourself that debt is a circumstance, not a character flaw.
Right. And circumstances can change.
Exactly.
Okay. So, I mean, that's a really good point. But what are some practical steps our listener can take to start managing those feelings of overwhelm and anxiety?
One thing that can be incredibly helpful is talking to someone you trust.
Okay.
A friend, family member, therapist, or credit counselor. Sharing your feelings and getting support from others can make a huge difference.
For sure.
Sometimes just saying those feelings out loud
Yeah.
can take away some of their power.
It's like letting some of the air out of a balloon, right?
Exactly. And remember, there are concrete steps you can take to regain control of your finances.
Okay.
We've talked about communication with creditors,
Right.
credit counseling, and debt management programs. These are all tools
Yeah.
that can help you navigate this challenging situation and move forward with confidence.
It's about shifting from that mindset of fear and avoidance to one of empowerment
Right.
and action.
I love that. From
Yes.
fear to empowerment. That's a fantastic way to frame it.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think it's time to tackle a topic that often evokes a lot of fear and anxiety.
Bankruptcy.
Okay, so bankruptcy, it's the B word everyone tries to avoid, right?
Yeah, it's a word that makes people nervous.
But reading these articles, especially that one from Upsolve, it seems like maybe we shouldn't be so quick to dismiss it.
Yeah, bankruptcy gets a bad rap.
It does,
Yeah.
but it's actually a legal process designed to help people, right?
Right. It helps individuals and businesses who just, can't handle their debt anymore. It gives them a way to get a fresh start.
Okay, that makes sense. So what does it mean to declare bankruptcy? Like, what actually happens?
Basically, it gives you this legal framework for dealing with debt you just can't repay. There are a couple different ways it can go, but the two main types for individuals are Chapter 7 and Chapter 13.
Okay, in Chapter 7, that's the one where you have to sell off your assets, right? Right, Chapter 7 is often called liquidation bankruptcy. You sell certain assets to pay back those creditors.
Okay, see, this is where I get nervous. Selling assets. It sounds pretty scary.
I know. But it's not always as bad as people think. A lot of assets are protected under bankruptcy exemptions. So you don't necessarily have to lose everything.
Oh, okay. So, what kind of things are protected?
It varies from state to state, but things like, basic household stuff, clothes, personal belongings, even a certain amount of equity in your home.
So they're not going to, come and take everything you own?
No. The goal is to help you get back on your feet and not leave you with nothing.
Right, okay, that makes sense. What about Chapter 13?
Chapter 13 is a little different. It's sometimes called reorganization bankruptcy. It's more for people who have a regular income and want to keep their stuff, their house or car, for example.
Okay, so if you've got a steady job and you want to hold on to your assets, Chapter 13 might be a better option.
Exactly. Instead of selling things off, you set up a payment plan to pay back some or all of your debts over a few years.
So you're basically restructuring your debt, making it more manageable.
Right. It can give you a chance to catch up on those missed payments, maybe even get your interest rates lowered, create a schedule you can actually handle.
That sounds like a good option for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So how do you decide which type of bankruptcy is right for you?
It's a big decision, for sure. You really need to talk to a bankruptcy attorney. They can look at your whole situation, your income, your expenses, your debts, what you own, and help you figure out the best path forward.
It's kind of like needing surgery. You wouldn't want to just pick a random surgeon, right?
Yeah.
You'd want someone who knows what they're doing.
Exactly. You need someone who's an expert, someone who can walk you through it all.
Now, one thing that really stuck out to me in the Upsolve article was how bankruptcy can actually make those debt collectors back off.
Oh, yeah. That automatic stay is a game changer for a lot of people.
But what?
The automatic stay. As soon as you file for bankruptcy, it kicks in. It's a legal order that says creditors can't contact you or take any legal action against you while you're going through bankruptcy.
Oh, wow. So it's like a shield against those harassing calls and letters.
Exactly. It gives you some space to breathe, to focus on getting your finances in order.
That must feel like a huge weight lifted off your shoulders.
Yeah.
Okay, but what about the long-term effects of bankruptcy? Like, I know it stays on your credit report for a while. How does that impact things like getting a loan or renting an apartment?
You're right. Bankruptcy will stay on your credit report for a number of years. It can make things a little tougher in the short term, getting credit, maybe facing higher interest rates.
So it's not like it just disappears overnight.
It takes time, but it's also not the end of the world.
So it's kind of a trade-off.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah.
It's about weighing the pros and cons and figuring out what's best for your overall financial well-being.
Right. So it's not just about the immediate relief. It's about the long game, too.
Exactly. And the good news is that with responsible financial habits, you can rebuild your credit over time. Bankruptcy doesn't have to define your financial future.
This has been such a fascinating conversation. We've covered so much. Debtors' prisons, contempt of court, those sneaky debt collection tactics, credit counseling, and even bankruptcy. I feel like we've really gotten a crash course in the complexities of debt and the legal system.
We've done some serious deep diving.
We have. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that knowledge really is power. The more you understand your rights, the options available to you, the less intimidating this whole process feels.
100%.
And there are resources out there, people you can talk to, organizations that can help guide you through it.
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to reach out for help. There's no shame in asking for guidance. In fact, it's often the smartest thing you can do.
Well said. So, to everyone listening, if you're struggling with debt, know that you're not alone. There is help available. And sometimes, even those seemingly scary options, like bankruptcy, can be a path to a brighter financial future.
It's all about finding the right solution for your unique situation.
Exactly. And remember, you can find more information and resources in our show notes. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.
That wraps up another insightful episode of the Deep Dive Credit Podcast, brought to you by Elite Credit Solutions, your go-to resource for affordable credit repair across the United States. We appreciate you joining us today, and we hope you found the information valuable and empowering. If you're ready to take control of your financial future, don't hesitate to reach out to us at 813-317-6776. Additionally, don't forget to like today's podcast, follow us, or subscribe to stay in tune with future updates. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep striving for excellence in your credit journey.